Hello everybody! In this video we will see how to generate a dynamic form using reactive forms. Let's get started. The idea of generating dynamic form is that we need to have a condition to display either one form field or the other form field. Let's start very simple and let's think that we need to generate two different form fields. The first one is input type text and the other one to be a select menu. I can create here the input type equals text. I will use a class form control just to have a better look and feel, and I use Bootstrap for this one. And the other one is a select menu. Select again, I will use the same class. And here we will have some options. Let's have also some comments, will be the input text. And this will be the select menu. If we go to the browser, we can see that we have here the drop down, and here we have the input type text. Of course, we need to have a dynamic form field. We need to have a condition. To have a condition, we can have something like a type. We can be like, I want to have a type, and this type accepts either a text or I will name it select. So what we can do now is the following. Have here an ng switch case. I will have it in an ng container. And the ng switch will be like ng switch. What do you want to check? The type. Now let's move both the input text and the select menu inside the container. And I want to display the input type text if the type is text. And I want to display the select menu if the type is select. Now, if we go to the browser, we won't see anything. How about if we provide here a default value, like text? We can see here we have the text. And if we provide here select, we can see that we have the select menu. How about though if we want to display also a label on top of the input text or on top of the select menu? We can simply have something like a label and be like, this is my label. So either we have the drop down, either we have the text. We still have this one, this is my label. But we need to have the label dynamically, and we also need to have the type dynamically. How about if instead of having like a union type with text and select, to have a different type here? So let's create one. Now, this one, this type, will be a dynamic form field model. And we can initialize it. This type equals a new object, and I want the label to be my label. And I want the type to be select. So we can change the condition in the template. Let's change this as well. Let's go to the template and be like, I want to switch between the type, and if it is text, display this one. If it is select, display the select menu. And of course, we can have dynamic label as well. This is how it looks like. We have the drop down And of course, if we change the type from select to text, we will have the text field. In terms of condition, this is simple, and we can understand that we can have a dynamic form field, we can define the label, we can define the type. What we also need to do is handle the value of this field, handle the value of the form. And to do this, we will create a form group. I will name it like my form of type form group. And I will initialize it like this.myForm equals new form group, or I will simply have here the constructor private FB of form builder. So this will be this FB dot group. To handle the value of the fields, we need to have a form control. I will create here a form control. I will name it like dynamic field. And this will be just an empty form control. Of course, now we have to apply a binding in the template. I will wrap everything in a new ng container. And I will apply a binding to the ng container with a form group, and I will assign the name my form. Let's close this here and just have a tab. Having the my form, we can simply now have a simple interpolation, my form.value, with a pipe JSON. The missing part is that we need to have the form control name. And what was the name of the control that we just created? Is dynamic field. So here we have dynamic field, and let's do the exact same thing in the select menu. If you go to the browser, we can see that we have here the object dynamic field with value null, and if we start typing, we can see the value. And of course, if we switch from text to select, we can see that we have the selected value. Nice. But currently, this is not a dynamic form field. This is a static field, and we have just a condition. We have to convert this to a more dynamic. And when we generate dynamic form fields, we often need to have more than one fields. So the dynamic form field will be an array, and I will have it like dynamic form fields. And this would be an array. And how about now, if I want to have a type select and a type text, and this will be my label select, and this will be my label text. Of course, we need to have here an iteration, another ng container, and I will have like ng4 let form item of dynamic form fields, and let's wrap everything in this ng container, and this time the dynamic form field will be the form item label, and the condition, the switch condition, will be on the form item type. Let's see in the browser, and now we have both of them, my label select and my label text. But what about this value? Since we have the same form control name, one overrides the other, and we need to make this more dynamic. And this is the fun part. I could delete this control The idea here is that we have to iterate all the form fields, and for each one, create a new control in the form group. These dynamic form fields, for each, this will be a form item. And now this my form.add control. What kind of control do you want to add? So the first one is to have the name. And the question here is, what kind of name are we going to use? Is it valid to use label? Is it valid to use type? No, it is not valid. So we will extend the model, the dynamic form field model, and we need to have an identification, a unique name. So I will have something like ID. It's common to have the IDs of type number, but in our case, I decide to have like ID of type string, and I expect to have here a unique name for each dynamic form field. And this will be the ID, and I will name it like dynamic select. And here will be the dynamic text. Having this ID, now we can add the control. And the first argument is the name, as we can see here. So we will use form item.id, and the value will be this FB control, an empty form control. This means now that we have a form group with all these fields. And if we go to the browser, what we can see is that we have an error, cannot find control with name dynamic field. Why? The reason is that we use here in the form control name the dynamic field, which do not exist. So we will replace this one with form item.id, and we need to have this in brackets to apply an interpolation in the form item ID. And I will do the same here. Now let's go to the browser. And what we can see is we have the dynamic select with an empty array. I think something wrong I did. Yeah, I don't need here to have an array. I'm going to have just null. So we have dynamic select null and dynamic text null. If I select something, we can see here the value, and if we start typing, we can see here the text. This is sort of the dynamic field that we have. Now let's improve it even more and move all of this logic into a new different component. So let's create a new component here, and I will name it like dynamic form field, and I will get all of this code cut and paste in the template. And this component requires as an input a form item. So let's provide here the form item. No errors. And what about now the form control name? Since we have form control name, we need to have also the form group. So let's add one more input, and this time the input will be of name form, and the type will be form group. Let's wrap all of these in an ng container. And use a form group directive equals to form. Nice. So let's use this selector, up dynamic form field, and this component requires two different inputs, form item and form, and we'll have to use it here. As said, the first one should be form equals to my form, and the other one is the form field. Form item, sorry, equals to form item. And if we go to the browser, what we can see is that we have two different fields, the select and the text. And it seems that we have a correct binding. How about this one? It's not that elegant, we can say, so we can remove this. So let's delete this completely and let's improve this component. And this time we will use in the constructor the root form group, and the root form group will be the form group directive. And we will do the following: this form equals this root form group dot control. This means that we do not need to define more than one input. We have to define only one input, and this is the form item. Let's go again to the browser, and yeah, we have a correct binding. So what we have achieved so far is that we have one component, which is a small component, as we can see. Our dynamic form field accepts a form item, which is of type dynamic form field model. We need to have the form. We get the root form group from the form group directive, and we use this component in this loop. And how about the dynamic form fields? The dynamic form fields are either select or text, and of course we can change this. Have another one, dynamic text 2. This is my label text 2, and the type is text. And now if we go to the browser, we can see that we have three different fields. And in a nutshell, this is how we create a dynamic form field. In the next video, we will see how to apply also validators in this field and how to provide options for the select menu. Thanks for watching.